So I just finished the first episode of Space Force with Steve Carell on Netflix. Just dropped this morning. Um, I didn't have any giant high hopes for it, but I assumed it would be funny. It's not particularly funny. It's not at all. I, I mean, let me just talk about it for a little while. It starts out with him getting his fourth star, becoming a four-star general. Big mystery, tiny little ceremony, which is strange because usually that's a giant ceremony. They even point that out. And then he's hauled off very quickly after the ceremony to meet the Joint Chiefs of Staff. All the heads of the military, and he thinks he's going to be installed as the Air Force chief, head of the Air Force. And he meets the old head of the Air Force, who he's enemies with, and the other guy's a philanderer and all has all these problems and is a criminal. You're like, okay. And they trade barbs, and then we go into the big meeting room, and there's the Navy guy and the Marines and the Army and the Coast Guard guy, and Diedrich Bader is, I think, the Marines guy, and Patrick Warburton's one of the guys, and you're like, wow, okay, here we go. They're gonna tell him he's Space Force, and he's gonna be the laughing stock, and this is the whole bit of the show, is that Space Force is this giant joke, and we're gonna have all these great comedic actors like make fun of him. They do this whole bit where everyone's like, "Oh, Coast Guard is still the worst," and I'm like, "Okay, this is super interesting." Okay, and then it's over, boom, and then he's heading to Colorado where the Space Force facility is, some giant facility, which we find it's this giant facility. So that's not the joke. The joke isn't that Space Force is a joke. It's that I don't know what I'm still not quite sure what the joke is. So he meets a guy like before he heads into the base, and the guy's like, "Oh, I heard about the big launch today," and so Steve Carell gives him the what do you mean? And then he leaves, and then when he arrives at the Space Force facility, he's put the guy in his trunk. Put him in jail until after the launch. Okay. Okay, so that's very strange. So he walks through everything, gets to his office, and boom, John Malkovich is in his office, and his assistant didn't tell him. So here's one of your classic bits, perfect setup. Oh, people are always going to be getting into his office, and he's not going to know, and he's going to be like, "Oh my God, you're in my office!" Ah. So, okay, John Malkovich is the civilian scientific advisor, and he says we must cancel the launch, and and Steve Carell's character is like, "Well, we can't cancel the launch because we got big dignitaries here." Okay, big dignitaries. So he has to make a big showing of Space Force to the dignitary, Congress people, to the Congress people. Okay, that's fine. Launch is going ahead. Okay, then we have a little scene or two, and then he's going back in his office, and boom, there's Yuri's in his office, who's the Russian liaison, who is like, oh, then we have to deal with the whole president aspect. So Yuri's like, show me the secret part, and he says no, and he's like, well, I'm going to have the president call you and tell you to do it, and then immediately Steve Carell's character gets a text from the president telling him to give Yuri access to this piece of our technology, which is insane. And so that's the whole sort of thing with the president is he's a Trump-like character who just tweets and does things by fiat and doesn't care about America. Okay. Okay. Wonderful. So that Steve Carell's character is like, oh, okay, instead of having the launch for the dignitaries, I'll launch this other missile, which is just like a rocket that you use to shoot things down. Okay, so he goes and he watches that, and it explodes and totally fails. And it's, $1 billion down the drain. And they make some jokes about how much money was lost. Okay. I mean, at least for me, I wasn't laughing at any of these things. And then, so our third, appear in the office without him expecting is Ben Schwartz, who's playing his social media guy. And he's like, I've got your tweet for the day. Okay, that's, non-military guy working for the military, writing his humorous tweets to try to make Space Force relevant, and it's not funny, and so he puts Ben Schwartz in the military jail until after the lunch because he doesn't want him tweeting bad things about the lunch. Okay, so then Steve Carell has to go and talk at a school. So he takes the helicopter over there, and there's this really nice female helicopter pilot who's excited, but we find out she doesn't want to be called a spaceman because some negative connotation of being in Space Force. Even though they sort of implied that she wanted to be in Space Force. So you're like, okay. So we get to the school. He's at the school. He gives his big, speech, and the reaction from the audience is collapse at the end, and then they leave. So it's not ridicule. They don't think he's a joke, but they don't think he's cool. So they basically indifferent. And then the daughter comes up and says, "Oh, give me $100. I'm going to a music pop-up concert. Pop-up concert. Don't know what that is. And I need $100. And I'm going with Yuri, the Russian agent guy on the base." One other thing, the daughter, who's supposedly in high school, supposedly 17 years or under, uh, is 20. Looks like she's in her 20s. The actress is 23. She's way too old for the role. You're just like, couldn't you cast a teenager in the teenage? You got one teenager role, and all the other kids filing out of the school look like they're in their 20s. There's no there's no 14-year-olds that are all like, "Ooh, this is it." Just like, no, none of that energy. Just like a bunch of people. It was very odd. So okay, that's the whole school thing, and he's like, "Let me talk it over with your mother." So then we get to the we cut to the mother scene, which I'm not quite sure. So he goes to visit his wife, who is in jail. No explanation. Rest of the episode, no explanation. She's just in jail. Just in jail for a long time. And she says, "You can move on." That's not really relevant to anything, but move on. Okay, she's in jail. And he's got this big, like you really want, and she's like made some female friend who's given her advice, and that's just sort of dropped. I mean, kind of everything in the show is just sort of thrown in there and dropped. Maybe if I watch all the episodes, I'm gonna be like, oh my god, these threads that they set up in episode 1 just are coming to fruition. But everything in this thing, like the Ben Schwartz character, one scene, one and done. They have a little tiny clip of him in jail at the end. That's it. One. He gets one little scene. And typically a thing like this is about the interrelationships. But basically it's just people bouncing off of Steve Carell. Which I guess, but it doesn't do much for me. So he's taking the helicopter back to the base, and he's like, "Oh, I have the Congress people waiting. I'm late. Land in a different place so I can get there quicker." The heli pilot says, "Nope. You're going to be inconvenienced. I don't care. I'm landing where basically I want to land." Okay. So he gets out. He deals with the Congress people, which is just like, "Oh, this one's stupid. This one's asked too many questions." Blah 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 blah. Then his dad calls, and his dad is across the country, I think in New Jersey, and he's doing all these crazy things. And then we find out that he has Alzheimer's essentially, and it's Fred Willard in his final role, I assume. And it's the joke is he has Alzheimer's and he's always getting into trouble, but also the mom is always getting into trouble. But we don't. But I guess maybe she has it too. They don't explain the mom. But then he calls up a friend who turns the satellite around, which looks down and finds the mom, so that the caretaker can bring them all back home. So that'll be fun in the future episodes to just watch his dad not remember anything about his life. That's the kind of fulfilling relationship that I love seeing in a show. I'm being facetious. So now we get to the point where Malkovich is back explaining that we can't do it because of moisture and all this sort of stuff. And then Carell's character is like, "Oh, this is about the button incident." And then we flash back to an incident where there was something about an expensive button for a couch or something, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Then we cut to another flashback where they're sitting there and Steve Carell in an empty room, and they're looking at the another a different rocket on launch pad, and Steve Carell puts his feet up and hits a button, and the rocket launches. And then we're back to him and Malkovich, and there's no explanation as to what that situation was. I mean, it sure seems like if he caused a false launch of a giant missile, Steve Carell would be out of his job, like period, just gone. And you're just like, I don't. I mean, so there's this whole sort of running thing where it's like we destroy these rockets and who cares, or it doesn't matter, or it doesn't have any repercussions. There's no repercussions in any of this stuff. So then we get to like what is kind of the most offensive scene of the whole show, and it's pretty terrible. We go out there and we're on the launch pad. There's the rocket. Then there's all the scientists lined up, and one of the scientists is the guy that played Jin on Silicon Valley, who's great. And I'm like, oh great, this is a character I like to see. This he was so incredibly funny on Silicon Valley. You know, you've hired this guy. You're going to give him really good stuff to use. And so immediately, Jin's character says there's too much moisture in the air, and we can't launch. And Malkovich is like, we can't launch. And all the other scientists are, we can't launch. And he's like, where are you from? And he's like, Ohio. And he's like, how do I know you're not from China? And you're kind of like, this is your head scientist on your project that is your big project, and you're acting like now you've just met him for the first time. Like for the first time I've come into this room and met these people that have been working on this project for, typical rocket launch, 5 years, 10 years. I don't know, just like a crazy amount of time. And as we just saw with SpaceX just 2 days ago, it was overcast. The president was there, and you know what they did? They canceled it because, you know what? There's no reason to take a risk when launching a rocket. There's no reason to. You can do it in 3 days. I mean, dignitaries aside. So basically, he wants to put it up there for the dignitaries, I guess, I suppose. I don't know. So it's just this whole weird thing. And then he's going back to his office, and the Congress people are leaving, and, it's all, everything has gone wrong. And so he goes in his office, and Kokomo by the Beach Boys starts saying it, and then he starts singing it, and then he starts dancing. And of course, as a person who has watched a lot of comedy, I'm like, oh man, this is going to be the ultimate embarrassment, because we're going to run back to that bit we've hit 3 times with people being in his office and him not realizing it. And he's kind of looked around his office, and they're kind of slowly showing us the office in the background. I'm just like, we're going to look, and there's going to be somebody, and he's going to be in the middle of his stupid dance, and it's going to be incredibly embarrassing. And actually, I would have thought it would have been really hilarious. Nope. He just gets to do his whole dance and work out his tensions. Boom. Now we're on the launch pad. He gives another speech. Blah, 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 speech. He's got the big red button. He pushes the big red button, and we look over, and there's Malkovich, who has another... Oh, we pan down. We see that his button isn't plugged into anything. And then we pan to Malkovich, who's got a big red button. Malkovich hits the button, and the rocket launches, and it goes up, and then it cuts out, and everyone's like, ah! And then about 10 seconds later, the character that the Jin guy's playing says, oh, it's successful. Okay, so he ignored all the scientific advice so that he could do this to impress the Congress people, kind of? Then we show the guys in the jail, and they're happy, yay! Now we get to the end part. Now we get to the wrap-up. The wrap-up stuff, oof, we get to the we cut to the heli pilot. It's night. She's walking home. Oh, talking on the phone. Mom, I think I'm going to get fired because I didn't do what he told me to do, because helicopters have rotors and they can cut people's heads off. Okay. And then she gets up there and there's a pineapple. And it's a card that he says, "Sorry I blew up at you." Okay. And then we get to the final scene. Him and Malkovich on his porch, taking in the day. And here's what John Malkovich's character says to Steve Carell's character: "You were right about the launch, even though you didn't know anything about science." You were right about the launch, even though you didn't know anything about the science. No, he was wrong about the launch. He was completely wrong about the launch. He should have postponed it, which would have been the smart thing. I mean, he got the clues. The rocket blew, the thing he just sort of tested out of hand blew up. The rocket with his foot blew up. He should have learned his lesson that you shouldn't do it. You should take the bigger stance and be a man and man up. But no, his whole thing is, "I'm the risk guy. I take the risks. I'm the guy that stands out there and does the risky things," basically, is his speech. But you're risking everything for no reward. If there was some reason why that satellite had to be up there to protect America, to do something, which would have been very easy to write in the line, we need that satellite up there because the North Koreans are up to something and we need to watch what they're doing, what's happening with them tomorrow. We can't wait a week because no, there's zero stakes. And I think, and then and then the final caveat is he has a telescope, a little, I don't know, I'd say 12-inch telescope. He looks through that and can see the satellite as big as day, and then he sees another satellite come up next to his satellite and take its wings off and dismantle it. In this little tiny telescope, he does this. And then he gets pissed off. How dare they do that to me? It's a mess. It's just a mess. Steve Carell's character is like, "I'm the friendly dad, but I'm the hard ass who takes risks and tells people what to do, but I'm not really a hard ass." And he doesn't play a hard ass. He just sort of plays a dad. He's sort of the head of this military thing, head of Space Force. It's the dad. And I just think there's this huge opportunity that was missed of making a real show about him struggling to try to make this thing happen. But instead, he's gifted everything, and he makes questionable decisions, and the interactions are impersonal at best, and there are no relationships. And, it's just a bunch of plot. Big pile of plot with some jokes. I laughed 2 or 3 times. I laughed at the Coast Guard joke, and and lots of stuff that's just wasted. So I give it a big meh. Too bad. I'll probably watch another one, and then I think that will be